Well, clearly, for a society to be able to agree on policy, to agree on objectives, to deal with disturbances, to deal with crises, it needs to have as full information, as full a debate as possible. I think our great concern in Turkey is that that debate is not happening, that people are not listening to each other, that it's a very polarized society, and that the media, rather than encouraging people to come together and talk and raising issues, is in fact serving to divide, to create even a greater wedge between people.
So media are corrupt in a way?
Well, there are various reasons why the media is not functioning as media. One of the most basic reasons is that there is a great complicity between media owners and the state side of doing business, so that media owners will typically build airports or have mining interests or do all sorts of things with the government, and they make the money not from their media interests but from the influence which their media buys.
But what happened with the internet, with the development of digital platforms, rise of citizen journalism? Did it change the media sphere in Turkey?
Well, of course, Turkey is one of the most common users of Twitter. It's worldwide. Turks figure very high. They're very much on Facebook. They're very much on Twitter. They use social media. And I suppose one of the reasons they do that is because they don't really trust conventional media. They feel they have to communicate outside the normal channels. Well, you know, the government is nervous about this, has been nervous about this. We've heard the now President Tayyip Erdogan describe Twitter as one of the greatest social evils. And yet when he came under threat at the time of a coup, he went on FaceTime to address the nation. So although they've declared social media as an enemy, they understand that it is something they too have to be friends with.
But what is the consequence of declaring social media as an enemy in Turkey? We heard that there are like many practices of censorship of particular channels of communication and platforms.
Well, what we've seen is that people who speak on Twitter frankly, who speak on Twitter, who write on Twitter like they would speak to their friends, have often got themselves into terrible trouble. There have been many, many people who have had defamation cases against them for insulting the president. Well, after the coup, the government has dropped many of those cases.
Can you tell us more about the censorship practices in Turkey?
Okay, well, and this happens frequently. So when there's bad news, when something bad happens, the government's first reaction is really to ban social media. So if there's an explosion or something happens, they will forbid it to be discussed in the media. And very often we've seen Twitter slow down, or on occasions Twitter banned. I mean, a very good example is the government did something which they knew to be unpopular. They removed the democratically elected mayors in many Kurdish majority southeast towns. And when they did that, they actually shut the internet down for several hours. So clearly they realized the power of social media and the internet, and they also realized that they can't quite control it themselves.
Many are saying that it is really hard to distinguish propaganda from media content today. Why is that the case?
Well, I don't think it is that hard to distinguish propaganda from media content, because when you have newspapers and television stations which are owned by people who are totally subservient to the government, who don't really even want to own those newspapers and media organizations, but only do so because they are told to as the price of doing business with the government, then of course those media organizations don't really produce news, they produce propaganda. So my definition of propaganda is when an organization gives no market value to the integrity of their media institution, then that they no longer are producing news.